The Immortals by MCDM is their new 5e monster book, but it is so much more than just a monster book with a list of stats. And I really like some of the things that they have in this book, and I think that the way that they do the layouts and some of the changes they make are going to become the new norm. Or at least I really hope they do, because I really like some of the monsters in this book. If you get this book, one of the first things that you'll notice when you open it up is that the first 27 pages don't have any monsters at all. They have a whole intro section where they give some alternate rules, explain terminology, and some of the layout changes in the book. In the intro section, you will see some changes or clarifications to the magic system. There's actually quite a few changes that they recommend or options for magic, including the difference between what they call psionic powers and spells. These powers are things that monsters can do, like a Displacer Beast's displacement ability, and they differ from spells because you can't cast counterspell or dispel magic on it, and anti-magic fields don't affect it. They also recommend some changes for the way that spells work with monsters. For example, monsters can cast multiple leveled spells in a single round. They could cast Misty Step as a bonus action and then still cast Fireball with their action, which gives them some more options to stand up to the players. They also have some new terms such as allies and enemies, and they define those so that you can understand the way that different spells work and who can be affected by them. You'll also find a new condition called Dazed, and it functions pretty similarly to the effects of the slow spell. Now, to talk about some of the layout changes they made, pretty much all of which I like. First off, they simplified the stat blocks by removing some of the repetitive information like racial information. So for example, a construct where it usually says they don't need food, sleep, or air on every single stat block. Instead, that's just part of constructs, and you know that if they're a construct, that applies to them. They also add the description for combat spells in the stat blocks of the monsters while lowering the overall number of spells that the creature knows. And then they added a utility spells category. Actually, here, let me just use this Night Hag to show you what it looks like. As you can see, the Night Hag only actually knows one spell that it would use in combat, in addition to some of the other attacks and abilities that it has. All of the other spells are listed as utility spells down at the bottom right. This helps speed combat along. They know fewer spells, making them less complex for the DM, and that's kind of the theme of a lot of this book. Simpler monsters to run, but overall a more memorable and unique experience from each creature. You'll also notice they moved the CR to the top right, making it easy to find in a hurry. Then, just after the CR, you can see the creature's roll. This Night Hag, for example, is a controller, which means they're going to specialize in debuffs and things like that. So if you look at the attacks, you'll see many of them put the target to sleep or other debuffs. Now, there are a total of 12 roles. Most are just identifiers to help the DM know what role that creature fills and how to use them in a fight really quickly. Some of the other ones that you'll see in addition to the controller would be something like an ambusher, and we can pull up this Hobgoblin Smoke Binder to use as an example for this. Efficiency and stealth, because ambushers are good at hiding and obviously ambushing people. It's in the name. Then some of their attacks, if you have advantage, they do additional things because you should be using them by hiding, and if you're hiding, as in your attacker can't see you, then you get advantage on the roll. So you should be able to proc that additional benefit. It's very much flavored and intended to be used as an ambusher. Then they could turn into smoke and run away. So this CR2 ambusher should play very differently than this CR2 brute. This ogre is much more designed and intended to be up in people's faces. And if you look at its reaction, if they become blinded, charmed, frightened, or poisoned, they can use the reaction to end that effect on themselves if they take damage. They also have multi-attack, so they will be far more efficient up in melee combat. Also, all of their attacks are melee. But just seeing a CR2 Brute lets you quickly know how this monster is intended to be used. Now, most of the roles don't come with any special abilities or anything behind them. They're just identifiers to help the Dungeon Master quickly identify what role they should fill in a fight. But that's not the case for all of them. There are some special roles. First are Minions. They're designed to be very simple and easy to run in a group. So let's take these Goblin Lackeys. They have 6 hit points. They don't have any hit dice. It's just 6 hit points. They also don't roll for any damage when they hit. It just does 1 piercing damage. And then all the minions have this minion rule where if they take damage from failing a saving throw like Burning Hands, they're just dead. There are some special minion rules as well, like the overkill rule, which are outlined in the minion section of this book. But essentially, if you look at something like these Goblin Lackeys, they're a CR 1/4 minion, and they give 10 XP. But something to know is that only applies if you use them in a group, because minions are not designed to be used individually. They are designed to be used in large groups. So they are great options for letting your players feel really cool as they just mow through hordes of creatures. Now, How many minions should you be using? To answer that, they have this handy dandy minion encounter builder. The Goblin Lackeys gave 10 XP and were CR 1/4, and minions per standard is 5. So that means you would need to use 5 minions to be the equivalent of a standard 1/4 CR monster. Very simple, very useful, especially for lower levels because minions also can't crit. You're less likely to accidentally kill some level 1s when you use minions. 2 more rules to know about are the companion and the retainer rules. Companions are basically like your pets. It actually describes them as a wild ally who can adventure with the characters, but it comes with a warning. These creatures can be difficult to control in the heat of battle and just might bite the hand that feeds it. They accomplish this with their ferocity rule, which is pretty interesting, and I'm looking forward to trying that in some of my games because who wouldn't want an owlbear as a companion? Then you have retainers, which are basically like your squires or mentorees. And an example of this would be this Hobgoblin Tactician. You can see under the features they get access to more stuff the more that the players level up, similarly to the companion. And the next 2 are where things get a little bit more interesting and exciting because they are your bosses. The roles are leaders and solo, which are probably pretty self-explanatory, but let's jump into it anyway. For leaders, let's look at this Goblin Queen here. It's pretty obvious, but the big difference between the leaders and the solos are that leaders are very much meant to fight with minions and in groups. Now this Goblin Queen being a boss, even at CR3, she is still going to get her essentially legendary actions and legendary resistances, but they use them differently. For legendary resistances, it comes with a cost, so it feels better to the players when they burn a resistance other than just they burned a resistance. Yay. So for this specific boss, she can make one of her subordinates or minions take the effect of the spell instead of her. She can only do it 3 times, just like a legendary resistance, but it feels a little bit better. If we go to the villain actions, so again, villain actions will function very similarly to legendary actions, but you can only use each villain action once per fight, and they are intended to be ran in order. So action 1 functions more like the opener. Action 2 tries to turn back the tide in the villain's favor, and then action 3 is kind of their ultimate. But you can break up the order if it seems fitting for the fight, especially if they're not going to survive long enough to go through all of them. Something else to know is that you can only use 1 villain action per round. So if you start the fight off with action 1, you can't use the next action until round 2. And similarly to legendary actions, they can only be used at the end of an enemy's turn. So, looking at some of Queen Bargnot's actions, her opener is that she can have all of her minions move up to their movement speed and attack someone. This would quickly let your players know that they are in for a serious fight that's going to be a bit harder than they may have originally expected. So for action 2, she can choose an enemy she can see within 60 feet of her and have each of her allies within 60 feet of her move up to their movement speed towards that target. So if she really wanted to surround somebody and take them down, this is an awesome option. And if you use flanking, this is especially effective. Then for her last move, her ultimate, she can have each of her allies make a weapon attack with advantage, and if it hits, it does a little extra damage. So that's how they replace legendary actions, and I absolutely love this. I think this makes each creature feel a little bit more interesting and unique, and just better combat. Notice also that there are actions, bonus actions, and reactions all listed. They, again, are not just stat blocks with basic attacks. Each of these creatures are meant to feel unique and memorable. So next, let's take a look at a solo monster. And of course, I'm going to be using a dragon for my example because what better represents a solo monster fight? And look at this bad boy. Though, also, there's something else that I should mention, and that is with all of the bosses, whether solo or leaders, they come with a little description and history. So in the case of Durizavanox, sure, we'll go with that. You know that he was once a powerful emperor who amassed enough reverence to rival the gods, but he was then betrayed by his sister, which left him defeated and buried under the rubble of a once mighty civilization. But over the last millennia, he has been gathering his strength back and he's ready for some revenge, which you can decide to use or not. As far as his stats, pretty solid. He has his legendary resistance, which when he uses it, his speed is halved and he can't take the disengage action until the end of his next turn. All of his attacks involve cold, so he has a useful skill where he can ignore resistance to cold damage. Take that, Totem Barbarians. He's got his standard bite and claw attacks with his breath attack, and notice that his breath attack doesn't just do cold damage, it will also restrain targets that fail their saving throw. Bonus action, he can do some additional damage and potentially also restrain somebody who needs to make a strength saving throw, and for his reaction, whenever he gets hit by an attack within 5 feet of him, he can decide to release a burst of cold energy that will hit everyone within 5 feet of him. But to the fun part. the villain actions. Action 1, his opener, he can beat his wings and potentially knock everyone prone around him while doing some damage. His mid-fight villain action is Royal Defense. He summons a spirit that can not only fight, but also bolster his defenses, giving him resistance to everything. And again, you could do this as his opener, but I think Action 1 is a little bit more thematic. And for his ult, he releases a pulse of frigid energy followed by a shockwave. And it's got pretty good range, 120-foot radius, which basically just does damage. But it's kind of fun because they need to make a Constitution saving throw and then immediately follow that up with a Strength saving throw. This definitely feels more interesting to me than just your typical dragon or ancient white dragon, which this would probably be the equivalent of. The creatures in this will likely be a bit more deadly, so be careful if your players aren't as accustomed to being strategic during the fights. Now, in addition to some of the creatures and new mechanics I've already gone over, the book also has some additional information. For example, it's got an encounter builder which actually uses CR in a useful way. And this is one of those examples where it gives some rules that differ from what is in the core rulebook, but I think these are a lot better. They have a table here where you can see, based on the average player level, how high of a CR to use and what would be an easy, a standard, or a hard fight, as well as the CR cap. So you know for a group of level 4s, you should not go above a CR 6. There's a lot more information that goes into this. For example, one additional thing you would just need to know in order to be able to use this is that you're supposed to multiply the CR by the number of players in the party. So for a party of 4 with an average level of 4, so you could have a total of CR4 to work with being a hard fight. And that could be broken up into 4 CR1 creatures or 2 CR2 creatures, however you want. It also gives some guidance on what to do about retainers or companions that are in the party, as well as how many fights you should have in a day or what the total CR budget for your day is. And I think this is far more useful and accurate than what's in the core rulebook. And you should also know that this is all compatible with the core monster books as well. And there's also some information on how you could convert a race or ancestry if you wanted. So if you see like a hobgoblin, for example, that you really like, but you want to switch it to a human or vice versa, it has how you can go about doing that, which again is really easy because they don't put a lot of the racial or ancestry features in each of the stat blocks. They have them listed out separately. They also have an environment section, so you can look up monsters for different environments, because the goal with this is that they wanted each creature to have a purpose, not just making stat blocks just to make stat blocks, which you can really see and feel in this book, and I think that's a good thing. It's definitely helpful for a dungeon master, because if you want a swamp scene, it's pretty easy to go and pick creatures from that environment. The next thing I want to talk about are villain parties, which are quite literally what it sounds like. Each party is a group of unique creatures, and along with that comes backgrounds, motives, and things they want to accomplish. They make great adversaries or parties for your adventurers to go up against and try to stop, in addition to them just being additional stat blocks. They also come with magic items and some adventure ideas. I believe they have a party for each odd level all the way up to 15, so 1, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, and 15th level. Overall, I think this is actually a fantastic book, and I'm excited to run some of these creatures in my own games. And I really like the format with the villain actions and just the different layout to help make things easier on the Dungeon Master. I hope we get to see some more monster books like this coming out, and if you're looking for some new monsters and you have the budget to pick up a book, this is a great option. Or if you're looking for a gift idea for your Dungeon Master, this is probably a great one, as long as you're willing to maybe take on a few harder fights.